So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Alexandria Library for tonight's webinar, Unregulated AI Use, Understanding Threats and Regulations. My name is Megan Zimmerman, and I'm a librarian with Alexandria, and I'm very excited to invite you to this event, which is a part of All Alexandria Reads. All Alexandria Reads is a yearly invitation to the community to join in shared reading and events. Our theme is America 250, celebrating 250 years of the country's history. This year, book selections are the novel Sing, Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, and the nonfiction is America, America, A New History of the New World by Greg Grandin. More information about All Alexandria Read events can be found on our website at alexlibraryva.org/AAR. And while we're talking about the history of the country, a good portion of why we are even interested is to understand our present and future. And that's why I'm so glad to have with us our speaker, Mary Finley-Brook. Mary Finley-Brook is a professor of geography and global studies at the University of Richmond, where she has taught since 2006. Dr. Finley-Brook has decades of experience conducting participatory action, research, and collaborates regularly with community-based organizations and frontline populations to advance climate justice and energy sector transformation. Her interests include environmental policy, climate justice, public health, energy transition, affordable access to renewable energy technologies, and equity in environmental, climate, and energy governance. She has served on review panels for the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and the National Science Foundation. Dr. Finley-Brook is co-author of the textbook Climate Crisis, Energy Violence with Academic Press, published in 2024. Her research has been published in International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, Annals of the Association of American Geographers, Energy Research and Social Science, Geopolitics, International Forestry Review, Water Alternatives, and William and Mary Environmental Law and Policy Review. Dr. Finley-Brook recommended the creation of the Virginia Governor's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice to the Northam administration and was a founding member. She conducted participatory research with the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative from 2015 through 2023. Current collaborations with community partners include green workforce training with Bridging the Gap in Virginia and energy justice initiatives in Puerto Rico with Comité Diálogo Ambiental. Dr. Finley-Brook, we're so glad to have you with us. We will take questions. So you're open to those who are participating can write your questions in the chat as you think of them, and then we will have time throughout to get to those. Dr. Finley-Brook, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today and to share this with you. That was quite a long introduction, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the presentation, share my screen here. And Megan, please let me know if there's anything happening in the chat that I should be aware of. So that all looks okay? And let me move this out of the area so I can get a full screen. So I'm going to be talking about unregulated AI use as we mentioned, and really thinking about, this is the overview of the full presentation. Why is this so important to talk about in Northern Virginia and Virginia overall? How did I come to this topic? I'll give that in some of the background. What would it mean to regulate AI? Is that even possible? What are some of the risks if we don't regulate AI? And then thinking about some potential solutions, and I will make sure that you have a lot of resources at your disposal when you leave, so if you want more information. But what I spend a lot of time doing these days is trying to explain to people what the cloud is, and I mean the one on the bottom right there, not the one on the top right. We've really done such a good job that I can be lecturing to students talking about AI for weeks on end, and somehow they still forget that there's all this material infrastructure that is behind our daily use. And I will talk about that some more. But I often start with the anatomy of a data center, because unless you've seen it, it might just seem like a box. And one of the things that we want folks to understand is just how much energy it uses. And so not only do you have the utility lines coming in, but you have the backup generation. And as many people know, the most common form of backup generation at this point is diesel generators. There's about 9,000 very large diesel generators There's about 9,000, and more than half of those are in Northern Virginia. So, this is one of the complaints of people living next to data centers, as you may know. We've started, and so this is coming from Damian Pitt at Virginia Commonwealth University. We've started to map what some of those pollution plumes look like. So, this was data from 2023 from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and this paper just came out, but it's really showing that those implications are much more than many people had anticipated. And so it depends on how frequently the diesel generators are going and how long they run and how many there are, but we're at very high levels, as you may know. So I need to clarify because some people have been working with data centers for a long time, and they'll think back to data centers that we might have had decades ago and say, well, that's not really that bad. The hyperscale data centers for AI are much larger. They have much more, not only water needs, which is shown here, but also electricity needs. And so we really need people to understand that the scale of data centers today is much more intensive than what we might have thought in the past, and that the United States has had the majority of what we call these hyperscalers. The portion owned by China has certainly grown, but the US has had the largest amount. And within that large amount that's in the US, the largest portion, as you probably know, have been in Virginia and specifically in Northern Virginia. So some of the reasons why we got these early the most had to do with the subsea cables that we had here in Virginia. So early on, we were establishing these subsea cables. And then there's several other things that are very important for data centers. And really the reason why Virginia has so many is of course the proximity to the federal government. So that was the largest consumer at the time that many of these were coming in. But then Virginia gave more subsidies than other states. We have been very generous. It originally was about $1 billion, but then when you look at lost revenue over time, that number keeps on going up, billions and billions of dollars of subsidies in the state of Virginia. Certainly having that infrastructure, so the undersea cables are very important. Affordable land, which is becoming hard to find, abundant and affordable water, and reliable and affordable electricity were all things Virginia was known for when we started getting this boom. Now those resources are harder and harder to come by, as you may be aware. But a lot of this build out has happened. And so you can still see that Virginia is a hot spot, but there's a lot more undersea cables. So these are considered the backbone of the internet. You might have heard that Virginia, the northern section there is called Data Center Alley. That's pretty commonly known, and you can really see the major clustering there. I have also heard it called the Silicon Valley of the East. But those of us who have been studying this know that from that hot spot in the north, really these data centers have spread south and have started to spread across the state. And we can come back to this, but certainly Data Center Alley is the most prominent area. So this is the textbook that Megan was referring to that I finished in 2024 with my co-author. And this was one of the last things that we wrote about. So it's a book on the energy transition. It's looking at coal, oil, and gas. And it's thinking about how do we have energy transition and address really this increasing climate crisis that we're experiencing. And so one of the last things we did, as I said, was to create a lab for Data Center Alley in Ashburn, Virginia. And as we looked into it, we were asking students to say, what's the hidden energy and water use? And are there possibilities for transition to a renewable energy? And the answer is really not at this scale. We cannot be having renewable sources or any sense of resource sustainability at the scale that this number of hyperscale data centers is going in. So it really made me aware of what was happening. So since 2024, this has really been the focus of my work. And I remember very clearly, some of you might have remembered this Washington Post article talking about how data centers were driving from Northern Virginia transmission lines to coal in ways that hadn't been happening. And then thinking about for Virginia's grid, are we able to carry forth with the Virginia Clean Economy Act that we had agreed to in 2020? And so the answer is, can we have the biggest data center market and decarbonize the grid? Not the way that we're doing it. So Sarah Vogelsong kind of answered her own question here. But what we do know is that this has been a boom. It's incredibly profitable. So Dominion Energy is doing really, really well. They're publicly traded. And process has continued because there's guaranteed rates of return on these investments when they're building new generation and when they're building transmission lines. So there's an incentive to build. In this instance, they're using data to suggest that it's very much needed. But no matter what, sometimes there's other ways that we could either be making reductions or other forms, that there's always that incentive to build. And I'm going to come back to that. But what you may be noticing in the news right now is the Valley Link. And when I've spoken to reporters who've talked to the investors in this project, they're very clear that this is about data centers in Northern Virginia. They need those extra high voltage transmission lines because of data centers. And so this is creating a lot of tension within the state, as you may know. And where I live in Chesterfield County, there was motivation, and this is at the last stage of appeal, the 1,000 megawatt, so a very large gas peaker plant that is not expected to run at full capacity. In fact, it's expected to be at maybe 38%, and it's very much argued to be for data centers. And where people have a problem with that, there's a couple of major problems. One is that ratepayers and so captive ratepayers, we don't have a choice other than Dominion Energy, and also taxpayers are really subsidizing these projects, and not as much the industry and the data centers who are going to benefit the most from them. So that's one of the reasons that there's been a lot of opposition. In this instance, and in many other instances, when you think about where infrastructure goes in, this is going to go into the same site that for 80 years had a coal plant. And so this community is a marginalized community, many low-income people, many people of color, speakers of other languages, so a very vulnerable, marginalized community that has dealt with this pollution in this area over 80 years is now going to get this gas plant, which again will have hazardous air pollutants, will have particulate matter, and a lot of other risk factors. And so this is just one of the examples. But if we look at this globally, and I need people to just kind of take a minute and really have this settle in what this is saying. So if we look at those global numbers there, so we're in 2026, so just a little bit beyond the 2025, and they're saying there's going to be a global expansion of coal. They're saying there's going to be a large global expansion of methane gas, as I call it. So coal, of course, has that particulate matter. There's all kinds of reasons that it's bad for air pollution. Gas has a lot of methane, and so it's even worse for the climate. And there is still volatile organic compounds, hazardous air pollutants that cause health issues. Nuclear is also expected to grow. So again, thinking about the mining, thinking about that disposal, we don't have a way to deal with nuclear waste that's safe at large scales. And then even thinking about renewables, and I don't know how much people know about kind of the global markets for renewables, but I put down energy colonialism and land grab because there's a lot of communities that are very globally who are very concerned about the mining implications, but also workers who are dealing with silica. If they don't have protected gear, and they're dealing with metals and even things that go into solar panels, this can be harmful to people's health if it's not done well. And when you're going to have this rate of fast expansion, there is concern that these supply chains are kind of broken and they're really not being done the way that we would hope to do clean energy. And so really understanding how much this expansion matters is one of my major lessons. So here I am talking about my positionality and my method. So positionality, how do I come to this? I think it's important to say that I'm very, not only as a professional, but as a resident and a parent, I'm embedded both in private institutions, state or public institutions, and then non-governmental organizations. I'd be glad to talk about any of those. The methodologies that I use, so some of that I call ethnographic participant observation. I'm seeing this around me all of the time. I just got put on the faculty technology committee. I will talk about what's happening at my school. Um, so I use every source of information really that I can get my hands on. And the reason why I say that is this is a very non-transparent industry. It's hard to get data. And I have to say that as this same industry is not at all careful with our data, right? Our privacy is breached all the time. Our data has already been scraped, but it's very difficult for us to get public information. And I will talk more about that. So one of the things that I've worked on is what I'm calling an infrastructure acknowledgement. I'm saying we have to actually know what we're actually using. What are we hooked up to now? Sometimes I start these presentations with an infrastructure acknowledgement saying, okay, we're on Zoom. What software are we using? What servers are we using? What implications does it mean for our energy? So I will come back to all of that. You're going to see me talking about having to acknowledge our infrastructure because it is something that's hidden. That's what infrastructure is it's kind of internal structure. So when I talk about the university, I think it's important for me to disclose that I am a faculty fellow with CLAY, which is the Center for Liberal Arts and AI at the University of Richmond. I've been doing this for the past year. This is with the Associated Colleges of the South. So you can see me listed there with colleagues from many different institutions. And I was not involved in the selection of this year's theme, which is Under the Hood, but that's exactly what I do. I look at infrastructure and I find it a little bit astonishing when you think about what is under the hood with AI and what that means, because it means we'd really have to look very carefully at this stuff. So that's what I've been trying to do. If you haven't read this Karen Howe book, Karen Howe was an industry insider, a journalist who was really writing about tech. And if you haven't read Empire of AI, it's highly recommended. But I think this quote really makes us think about what is behind this and what more do we need to know. So at the University of Richmond, one of the things I'm very concerned about is we promote AI, and I'm not sure that we're doing it in a way that fully makes people aware of the supply and disposal networks. I'll just say that I know that there's a lot that has not been discussed. The picture on the right is the type of kind of misleading information I feel that we give. And so you've got this student who's studying outside. She's got her reusable water bottle, but she's using free paid for Gen AI tools that are very energy intensive. We're having our students transition over to Chat 5, which is the most energy intensive use. And I don't think people know exactly the implications of what is under the hood. So I can come back to that, and I'm really encouraging that knowledge. And then at the University of Richmond as well, we have adopted Workday. And I always wonder why a small liberal arts college would need to have the same platform, AI platform, as Fortune 500 companies. I will say you, it's been a year and it's been a nightmare. People still don't know how to do the basic stuff because we're all learning a new system as it's kind of being built and constantly changing. So at my professional job, I am surrounded by AI continuously all the time. And there's a lot of concern that there has not been attention to really thinking about whether this is good for students, whether this is good for employees, and what it actually means. So I can come back to that, but I'm going to keep going because I live in Chesterfield, as I've already mentioned. And so I need to say that Chesterfield has announced that they're building 3 major Google data centers. It's actually 3 data center campuses. It's probably 11 data centers. And when we found out about this, they announced it as the Rolls-Royce of data centers. But what they also told us is that for 7 years, this negotiation was ongoing. And so the Board of Supervisors chair at that time, he's no longer the chair, but he was saying, we're thrilled to say that this is Google. Well, I can tell you, I've spent the last almost year looking into what this means. And the more I uncover, the more that I understand that taxpayers such as myself are footing the bill for this. This is not something I'm thrilled to say because we've only gotten a small amount of information and it gets worse every other thing that we get. And so we're in a process of discovery. discovery. And I will talk about that a little bit more. But to say I had been teaching about how Google and others use these non-disclosure agreements before I found out that this was happening in my own county. And so this was put together by Investigate TV. And so these are some of the trends. And it's really a fear, a sense of fear that is put into these local governments. So sometimes only one person in the government actually signs the non-disclosure agreement. But threats are if anybody talks about it, if anything's said, and it locks in for a long term. And so, like, this has already been going on for 7 years. We still don't know in Chesterfield, like, how much we could be told or how much is still being hidden. And I will give an example in a moment. But there's vague terminology that then you hide behind. And so in this instance, when they were talking about it, they were saying things like Project Peanut, because that's one of the names of the data center campuses. And it was Peanut LLC that we were negotiating with, not Google. And so that's one of the ways to use code names so people don't know what's going on. And then to say it has to cover everything, whether or not it actually does. So this is a trend. And one of the things that has happened in other cities, so the Dallas in Oregon got, this is a very famous case because basically the city was suing to not let their own residents and constituents know what was going to happen with the water system. They were keeping Google's secret from their own constituency. And this broke open because of Freedom of Information Act requests. And so people were able to find out in the end just how much water was happening. And I'm afraid that this is going to be a similar situation where we are in Chesterfield because there is discussion of over whether Google's going to build a $1 billion water line or whether that's something ratepayers and taxpayers will have already done all that necessary work so that Google does not have to. And we're in a situation where we don't even know if we can trust our representatives because of the fact that they've signed this. So I think you get a sense of why we need to regulate industry, but I am going to take it just a little bit further on why this is really something that's so important and also what are the risks if we don't do this. So trade associations, and in this instance, this was a real estate trade association, was giving advice to data center companies saying to avoid this horrible problem of public record disclosures, these are some things they should do. So just when you're reviewing documents, don't give physical copies. Make sure that you're not allowing people to actually have these full printed copies, redacting sensitive information, and then creating these special purpose entities, like I said, Peanut LLC. And so this, depending on how you're thinking about this could fix a problem if what you're trying to do is to make sure the public doesn't have information. Now, if what you're trying to do is make sure people have fair access to information that impacts their lives, this would not be the recommendation that should be made. But it's part of a larger anti-regulation effort by these large tech companies. And I could go on really about all of these different tactics that are very well shown and demonstrated. But basically, we've come up against kind of a wall of anti-environment, antitrust, non-competitive efforts. These are really very profitable industries that have a lot of money and they lobby very hard. And they basically say the law shouldn't apply to them. There should be kind of a federal preemption, which we can talk about has happened. But this is an industry that does not want to be regulated, and that's one of the reasons we need to be so aware of the need to regulate. So this lobbying that has happened, we already know has been very lucrative. So this is a pretty recent article that is saying that these companies, so it's listing Amazon, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, Meta and Tesla avoided $51 billion in taxes, and saying that Tesla paid zero taxes in this instance. And so this lobbying pays off for sure. But it's happening in a lot of other ways. It's not just about the financial gains. I will come back to that. But you can see when these companies pull their funds together and lobby under net choice, and there are different kind of agencies that they're working with. But in this instance, if you look at that litigation center, it is a wall of litigation. Every single possible thing that they're trying to dispute is always going to be litigated, and with the funds to do it. And so they can kind of outfund anybody else. And so there's just an incredible amount of power. And what that's meant is that, again, ratepayers and taxpayers are not really probably we're getting the short end of the stick. So we're not being taken care of by our electeds because there's so much lobbying going on. And so what we know is this is a Bloomberg report from last year talking about how data centers are making our power bills more. There's a lot of reasons. It's very complex, but the trend is definitely showing that we're paying more for our power bills in areas that have a lot of data center activity. And there's other concerns about your electricity in that instance, but cost is often what people are worried about. And particularly, so I just need to tell you a couple of things about this article. So, first of all, the PJM interconnection is our interconnection. It is the largest electric grid in the US, but it is also our electric grid. And it's saying, families could get stuck with higher electric bills if the data center boom goes bust. And I don't know how much you've read about this, but most people aren't saying if, they're saying when. And that's certainly something we need to be thinking about in Virginia because there's so many more data centers in the pipeline. We've already got hundreds, but there's hundreds more. But the last piece of this article I think is really super important, this last line here. So Watchdog said the costs being carried by consumers amount to a massive wealth transfer. That's wealth transfer from, again, ratepayers to some of the most wealthy corporations in the world. That's the way that this wealth transfer is happening. And so it has a lot of people very concerned about it, and particularly in the larger context. And again, this is just one article. You can do plenty of research on this. But there is concern that the AI bubble, again, it's not if, but when we're going to see it burst, and how big it is and what it does to the larger economy. There's lots of speculation about, but there's a lot of people who are very concerned. And I do think that this is something Virginia needs to be thinking about because we could be left, holding a lot of this debt. And there's a lot of motivation to pretend that we should keep building, even when we're getting signals to say, like, slow down, maybe we're beyond what we can handle, maybe our grid can't handle it. And I can talk about how that has happened within our region already. Dominion Energy has said they can't continue at the pace that we've grown. And so some people say, well, then the solution must be more gas. The problem with that is manyfold, and part of it is it's not being done always on the up and up. And I'm going to talk about kind of some of the ways that happens. But if we're at a point where we're worried that we've already got this bubble, it probably is not the best thing to continue without regulating and thinking about how we could be smart about these investments. And so I can come back to some of that. But the other thing that I'm concerned about, and this is actually what I'm currently writing a book on, is how fossil fuels have boosted AI and how AI has boosted fossil fuels. And so we are extracting more oil, we are extracting more resources as a result of AI being able to be able to do that. And yet many of these companies are talking about their environmental commitments, they're talking about climate pledges, but unfortunately the numbers don't match with what the commitments or pledges are. And so that's why they get accused of hypocrisy, both sidism, trying to look both green and also really super promoting fossil fuels. And so we've learned quite a lot of this about this from young professionals who came out thinking that they were going to be helping the world. Will Alpine is one of the cases that we've learned quite a lot from. He thought that Microsoft was going to be doing something good for the climate. He worked for many years and then saw really how it was being used to extract more oil and not being used for the climate. And so that's one of the things I always need to kind of remind my students or remind people who want to look at this this with rose-colored lenses. There's a lot of people out there who want to think that AI is going to solve the climate emergency. And the first thing I need to say is pay attention where the time and resources are going. And so people who are working in AI, the vast majority are actually looking at exploitative data uses. They're building platforms to sell data back to us at a very high profit margin. And it's not these non-commercial uses, such as all of the environmental good that potentially technology could be doing. And so we have to be really careful, like what we want to think and what is the actual reality of the situation in front of us. And so I recommend this book. I'm going to talk about it a couple of times. Ulises Mejias and Nick Coldry, Data Grab. So this is one of the points that they make about social and environmental impacts, and I will come back to them again. But to be aware of, in an ideal world, if we had the absolute cleanest energy and the most ethical and cleanest AI, maybe this title could be somewhat true, but that is absolutely not what we have. We have business as usual, status quo, really not making the changes that they need to because nobody's forcing them to. It's all voluntary. And so there's a lot of disinformation. And these are the three of the phrases that I will throw out there. But water positive, carbon neutral, and net zero, where it's not that. And I'm going to explain exactly how. So I spent a lot of time looking at how fossil fuel companies do this. So in my book, I talk about 15 forms of green deception or greenwash. Now I talk about how that's being done by AI. So green by association, this idea of in the cloud, a bait and switch. So people want to think it's water positive, or they want to think that carbon can be captured and stored at that scale. It can't be, just so you know. We can't capture carbon and store it at the scale that data centers would need or fossil fuels would need. It's been proven to be unsuccessful and very expensive. So it isn't existing at scale today, and yet companies talk about it all the time as if it were working. And that's part of the smokescreen, right? This idea of getting to carbon neutrality, but what they're using is cheap, low quality offsets that we have been proven, like 80% of them don't actually do what they claim to do. And so if that's what they're using as a smokescreen, as you can imagine, it's actually much worse in reality than what these companies claim. And if you look at them, like if you look at the Google sustainability report, they will say that they're going to be running 24/7 on carbon-free energy very quickly. They'll say that they're at 120% of fresh water. Now that has to do with offsets. They're not doing it in the watersheds that they're in. And so you have to pay attention to the shifting baselines and the rhetoric. I could unpack all of this, but to say that they make these huge claims and nobody's holding them accountable, and they'll just back away from them too. Like this was one from Microsoft from 2020, and it's claiming to remove all carbon it has ever admitted, and it's backed away from some of this, but people don't necessarily like even really hold them to the things they say. Which is very unfortunate. And we need people to be paying attention to the differences between what the corporations are actually producing in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, so greenhouse gases, and then what they're actually claiming. And so this is because of their offsets. They say if they're investing in cleaner energy, whether or not that's actually a one for one, and we could talk about all the ways that that doesn't work out. But the one on the top is actually what their actual emissions are. The one on the bottom is what they're saying their emissions are. So you can just see how vastly different they are. So to teach you just a teeny bit more about how these companies kind of make fake claims or do that bait and switch so that we think they're doing better than they actually are, they use this number called a power usage efficiency. And when they talk about power usage efficiency, and they also talk about water usage efficiency, and it's the same way, it's what's happening within that box. And so while they're talking about how efficient their equipment is and how they're getting those efficiencies better and better, first of all, are they anywhere near where they need to be, or are they just comparing themselves to themselves, which is usually what's happening? But on top of that, if you're leaving the methane gas, you can see how that's just going outside of the box, or if the transmission lines are just outside of the box. They're not taking into consideration really all of their implications. So a lot of sustainability claims are premised on artificial boundaries. So they don't actually talk about all their implications, and then they brag about what they're doing in a very small way. But that's only one piece of it. So, another way that these corporations are really kind of disguising their larger impacts is they'll say they're going water positive, but they'll really only count that teeny little amount within a boundary. And one of the things that they don't count is the energy. And as somebody who focuses on energy and knows how much water we need to cool down thermal plants, so those are going to be your coal, your gas, your oil, your nuclear, you need a lot of water. And so the data centers don't include all of that water on top of all the water that they're using inside, which is a really hard to get a number on. I can come back to that. But even beyond that, and we're facing this right now in Virginia, data companies are saying that they have this water efficient equipment. And they're really talking about how they've made huge gains in water efficiency. But what they don't explain to you is that those technologies use more energy. And because the energy they're using tends to be fossil fuels, it uses a lot of water. So any gains that they're making because of potentially having more water efficient equipment is being lost because of the increases of energy that they need for that equipment. And so we really have to pay attention to what's being said and what the actual reality is. And so we know that there's a risk of what we call water stranded assets. So things that cannot live out their natural life because of the fact that there isn't enough water to maintain them. And so this article is from 2022. And I remember seeing kind of nationally how a lot of companies who were in the West in drier locations were wanting to come to places like Virginia because they seem to think that we have like unlimited amounts of water. And I can talk about that more. But there was this idea, well, let's just go where there's more water. Like maybe Virginia with the Potomac River or the James River, it's going to be better there than where it is now. But as you may know, and of course, this drought advisory we're keeping an eye on, this was from January, and we're still watching how things happen. But one of the things that came out with this drought advisory is in Northern Virginia, the reservoirs were a lot lower than they were expecting. And so there are people who are saying that that probably has to do with the amount of withdrawal for data centers. And so, again, we have to keep watching all this stuff and get our numbers and really make sure that we're paying attention to where the water is being pulled from and what it could potentially mean, because this will, of course, conflict with other uses. And so there's growing competition for scarce water, as we know. And data centers, when they sign their contracts, it's not flexible. They're going to have that water, even if it means residential and other uses are not available. And so there's going to be increasing conflicts over water with climate change, and AI use is making this go up really quickly. As you can imagine, the amount more data that we're storing, the amount more data that people are using. So this is where I get to how and where to regulate. And that's not an easy question. I'm going to be really, really clear about it. So I'm going to talk about multiple scales. And the first thing I would say, what are the best scales? All of them. We need all of them. You can look at this story map, but just so you know, all of my slides, I have hyperlinks in lots of places, and my reader notes at the bottom, my lecture notes have a lot of sources as well, and you're welcome to have the slides and all of these additional sources. So I've put together a story map on how do you govern AI. This was last year, and I've continued to look at it, but I first want to suggest all the things that we need to be governing, right? And so transparency, justice and fairness, responsibility and accountability, privacy, non-malfeasance, like really thinking about all the ways it could be used unethically. But then when you start thinking about all the implications of AI, right? And different people are worried about different things, and some people are worried about all of these, but displacement of the workforce. So certainly some of these resource limits and the greenhouse gas emissions. You may know there's a lot of discrimination within the algorithms. Like there is ways that it's drawing from past history. And sometimes they call them hallucinations, but sometimes it's really built into these training sets. And so both gender and racial bias of the training sets that are being used, and I can come back to some of these forms of discrimination, but the misuse of sensitive data is where I want to spend just a little bit of time. So there's the unwanted sharing of data, but there's also like the misuse of sensitive data. So I want to talk about how this stuff's been regulated, how it hasn't been regulated, and really where there's concern over high risk AI is where I'm headed in a moment. But first, I want to show you this is, and again, I have the hyperlink so you can go click on all of these. This is an interactive website, and it's talking about how nationally AI has been regulated. It's a couple of years out of date, but what you'll be able to see, I mean, they have kept up on it to 2026. A lot of these bills have actually, they were on the downturn. So most of the regulation was happening like in 2019, 2021. And so this is all over the world. And if you look at the topic distribution, you're going to see that the economy was where the most bills were being laid out. Climate change and human rights, there were almost no bills. And so again, we had some portions of things attempted to being regulated, but not coverage of probably everything people were worried about. I will talk about the United States just for 1 second and say this is an executive order, so we don't know exactly what the final repercussions will be. But in December of 2025, the Trump administration put out this national policy framework for artificial intelligence. And what it specifically aims to do, and we're going to find out what this means in the state of Virginia, it basically tries to say that states can't have any ability to regulate AI and that there could be repercussions. There are proposed repercussions within this executive order if states do try to regulate. So we can come back. There's still a lot of things that we don't know about how this exactly is going to play out. But we do know that this would be kind of the opposite of a response. I'm going to talk about European Union in 1 minute, but also of there's many governments that come in on the other side. So the city of San Jose, which, as you know, California, capital of Silicon Valley, has started this Gov AI coalition. There's actually 300 different government entities, local, state, and federal, so it's not just city, that are working together. And if you look at their language, again, you can go to their website. They talk about using AI for social good, but they also talk very clearly about having to collaborate against AI risks. And so many governments are really thinking about what are the risks from AI and what should we do. And the instance that we can certainly pay attention to, where there's the strongest AI policy anywhere in the world, is, of course, the European Union. And as strong as it is, so they do have unacceptable risk up there with some of the things that we're actually doing in the US. Social scoring, I can talk about. Mass surveillance, we're getting more information on. Certainly, some of this behavior causing harm. This is starting to be global, but the deep fakes. So some of this stuff should be outright prohibited within the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. But even people are saying that the EU doesn't go far enough and that any entity is really going to need global cooperation. So I can talk about this AI red lines. And so you can see this is coming from some former heads of state. This is prominent features who were going to the United Nations saying that we really need to come together globally to sign this agreement. And so what they were worried about is I'll show you on the next slide really what it addresses, but they're saying like these are irreversible harms for humanity and global stability. And so we can think about ways that AI could really be breaching that. And they're saying that no one government is really going to be able to mandate this, that we have to be working together. And that major AI companies are acknowledging the risks. And this is definitely true. And so these are some of the things that they're trying to regulate or avoid. So certainly malicious use, weapons of mass destruction, autonomous self-replication, like when have we crossed that boundary to the point of no return, and then the termination principle, if meaningful human control is lost. So there's a lot of people at global levels very concerned that we need to be working together, that it goes beyond what any national government can do or really any local government can do. But I'm going to come back down to the local level. And then I'm going to talk about workplace. I'm going to talk about some other potential regulatory options. First, I want to talk about Virginia. So last year, so not in this General Assembly, in last year's General Assembly, we had a policy on high risk AI. And it was made through both chambers, and it did make it to the governor's desk, and he vetoed it. He was worried about small businesses. And there probably would have been some negative repercussions for small businesses. What I would argue is that this risk is so great, we should be helping those small businesses get up so that they can be competitive in this environment, but we should be protecting you, me, and everybody else because this is very serious stuff. So, high risk AI is everything to do with our legal information, our educational information, our financial information, our healthcare, our housing, our insurance, like all the things that you'd be worried about discrimination, among other things. Remember, I was putting slides together on this late one night and I forgot that I was asking AI. And I asked AI about Virginia's high risk artificial intelligence. And it very clearly said it's trying to protect against algorithmic discrimination. That's that discrimination, that bias, that profiling of individuals. And so this is what policy against high risk AI would be doing. Virginia would have been the second only state to have passed this. We don't currently have it in place. And what happened last year, and I'll be able to talk in a moment about this year to an extent, but to say what happened last year is there was 33 bills introduced. People were very starting to be very, very worried. We had the JLARC study, the Joint Legislative Audit Review, saying that we were really needing to curtail growth. Because we were building quite quickly. We did not have the electrical capacity. And yet we didn't pass any of these bills that had been put forth. The ones that were signed into law were very strongly diluted. And as I said, one of them, the one that we were worried about with high risk AI, was vetoed altogether. So this year there was more than 60 bills that went into the General Assembly. We still don't know exactly how these are going to turn out. We know some that definitely failed and didn't make it through. We know that there are some that are still pending the governor's decision. We don't know, as I said, whether that federal preemption, whether the executive order coming from the Trump administration, there will be a response. So all of this, unfortunately, I can't tell you the final outcome, but I can say these are things that we definitely need to be paying attention to. Switching gears just a teeny bit here, I want to talk about what we could be doing in our workplaces. And I think that's important to think about. Like, as much as I'm saying we really need global policy and that we really need to be working with other countries, as I said, I also think we need policy at every possible scale. So, one of the things that we could think about is, and I do this in my classroom, um, what AI safeguards would you include for a local government, college, or private firm working in the Commonwealth? So I focus it around Virginia just so that people can have a sense of what that means. And then who's going to actually make sure that there is compliance once you actually figure that out. So one of the things that I have my students start from is Brightmind lists 10 provisions. This is very much thinking about a workplace like a business. And so, but no matter what it is, and we're starting to have this problem in universities because we need to be really clear about not only what employees can do, but what students can or can't do, whether they need permission, whether it's banned. And then we also need to audit. So you're seeing number 5 and number 8 here. So there's a lot of ones that I don't mention, but then really doing an audit to say, like, are we actually doing what we say? What other risks could be incorporated based on us either not following our policy or not being able to assure compliance? So there's a lot of things that you could think about at a workplace. This is an article that I've been really sharing with a lot of people. I want us to be certain that when we say media quiteracy, this isn't a blanket rejection. I understand technology can be used for bringing us together like we're doing right now. And so it's a selective process, but what I very strongly feel is that in our curriculum, we need people to be able to make informed decisions about when they want to opt out and to have the power and the knowledge to opt out. And then know what they want to opt into. It, right? Again, it isn't this blanket no technology, maybe not even a blanket no AI, but what is behind the scenes? What is under the hood? And so I always argue for what I call a collective digital degrowth. And I always have to explain because people always kind of jump to the wrong assumption with degrowth. So what it would mean is, first of all, recognizing there could be appropriate technology, right? So degrowth doesn't mean eliminating all of it. What it means is defining what matters and working towards it collectively. So the degrowth is strategic downsizing of what causes harm, and then actively deciding and promoting and keeping and maintaining what is valuable. And so degrowth has some of that element of maintaining what we value. It doesn't mean eliminating everything, it just means being selective. And so I'm coming back to my Mahias and Coldry. And so some of the things that we need to think about is that these platforms, one of the social impacts is that not only the disinformation, but there's a lot of hatred and violence, and a lot of misuse of our data in ways that we feel very uncomfortable with. And so we want to be able to opt out of these things that are causing harm. We want to be able to have better studies so that we're making decisions in a more informed way. A lot of this, we don't know what the mental health implications. Certainly, we're finding with young people, with children, that we're starting to have some documented evidence of some very serious and concerning harm that can happen. But all of us, we don't really have the full sense. But educators, and this is a group of European and international educators who are very clear that the research is starting to show that Gen AI and many of these AI models are not good for students. They're not good for learning. They're not good for helping people to be able to develop agency, and to make decisions for themselves. And so there is an open letter from these educators and others saying, hold on here. We need to actually know what this is doing before we're going to just scaffold it into all of our curriculum. So I've started already down the path of potential solutions. I'm going to go into some more, and I'm going to speed it up just a little bit here. But the first one I'm going to say is education. So this is an app that's was made by a student in my department, and a lot of people don't know how close they are to data centers. And I will send you this app. You put in your address at the top, and you're going to see anything within a half mile. But it's also going to show you, are there parks next to it? Is there a school next to it? Is there a senior center? What else is right there in that area? So certainly getting people to pay attention and care is one of the biggest issues. One of the best projects I think I did in really generating education and getting people involved was a pilot project that I did in 2024 with the Virginia Geographic Alliance. And we invited school teachers from across the state, and a lot of them are having to put together data literacy and put together classroom assignments for the standards of learning. And so we were working with them to say, like, how can you think critically about data centers in your community while also preparing materials for students? And we had a fantastic cohort. We were really focusing quite a lot on STEM, so the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But my favorite project by far was STEAM with art. And so there was a teacher in the Arlington School District, an art teacher that worked with high school students. And so these were advanced high school students, and they built a 3D panorama of a data center. And they really thought about the textures and the colors and what goes on around a data center. They studied the ecology. They really studied the materials that they were using. And this was their final product. And I thought they did such a great job with the yarn. It's drier and hotter near the data center. And in the close up of the data center, you can see the receipts they had popping out the window to show how expensive these things are. And then they put together a PowerPoint with information and some actions that they thought people could take in their communities. They took these to local high schools. They're displaying this information, and they're trying as high schoolers to get people in their community to know more about data centers. So that's one example of something that we can be doing in our libraries. Certainly promoting data literacy, I think, is one of the most important things, and having people understand that a lot of what we're teaching is really just like how to prompt AI and not necessarily like what's behind it. And so I always encourage people to think about, like, are you just like learning how to search, or are you critically navigating? Can you actually analyze and interpret? And can you tell other people about how to manage data in a way that's adept and protects privacy in all of these different ways? So there's a lot we can do to get ourselves more literate in data. This is something that the librarian I work with at the University of Richmond has helped me put together. It's a library guide. So thank you, Kyle Jenkins. What we focused on is Virginia resources. We focused on things that are open access. We focused quite a lot on sustainability, and now we're starting to do even more on AI. So getting resources like this. And then when you do get these resources and you start seeing the patterns, it's often true that you want to have more policy solutions. And so the first place I would encourage you to go if you're starting to look for policy solutions is this report that was put together by Public Citizen at the end of last year. It's if you're looking for the link, it's called Reining in Big Tech. And so the first two, they're saying pause new data center development, do a moratorium until we can actually kind of catch up and know what's happening and make smart decisions. That is being introduced at a federal level. You may see that's not just at state levels. There were multiple states that have been discussing this. Repeal or limit tax incentives or other financial incentives. And a lot of the studies that go along with this, I'm going to skip to a second study and then I'm going to come back to this public citizen one. A lot of the studies that go along with this, and I think this is probably the most in depth, it was put together by Good Jobs First, and it's called Cloudy Data Costly Deals. And basically, what they were able to show is the states that are subsidizing these corporations sometimes can't even tell you the parent company. They can't tell you the address. They can't tell you who got what. They can't tell you if jobs were added. Like in some instances, it's supposed to be subsidies in exchange for certain things. They cannot tell you this or they won't, right? It has been not available and transparent information. And so there's a lot of pressure saying, like, we should not be subsidizing this with taxpayer money if we can't even tell you who these people are and what they've done. Going back to that other study, and I really encourage you to read both of these. Some solutions are notify and directly engage impacted communities. Where I am in Chesterfield, when I'm talking about those three major Google data center campuses, nobody's been notified. It's been since August. We found out this, some of these properties were purchased 6 and 7 years ago. Nobody knows. The neighbors have no idea. They will be brought in way too little, way too late. And that's what usually happens. Commission an independent study. So energy and water demand, we should know that. And if we're not going to be told directly by the corporations, we need to have independent sources of this. Tech companies paying their fair share. We can talk about there's some information in front of the State Corporation Commission, maybe some things that we would change within Virginia to change the rate structure so that it isn't so much on ratepayers. This is a real, I know there's a lot of text on here, but this is really super important. And so those non-disclosure agreements that I was talking about and really having to have transparent online disclosure of everything that's listed on there, the ones on the bottom are very important for Northern Virginia. A minimum durational commitment. The equipment in these facilities is obsolete within 3 to 5 years, right? And so, are they going to keep bringing in new equipment? What are they going to do as technology changes, as sizings get smaller? What about a decommissioning bonds? I'm just not seeing it in most places. And so, what happens if they go belly up or pull out or all of these things that do happen? We are not prepared for what's going to happen on the other end. And so, that's a super important one. So, what happens if you don't have these policies? And you can go read those reports. There are certainly other policies. There is a huge surge in data center opposition. You can see that we are really at the epicenter of a lot of that. And we could talk more about how to oppose. I'm going to show in a minute. What it does show is that in some instances where there's a lot of opposition, sometimes developers do pull out. And these are two Virginia examples. In that second example, the one from Charles City, just so you know, a new plan came in, and this time they want to bring a gas plant. And so in some instances, you may have a developer pull out, but there may still be future developers who come. But one thing to pay attention, this has just happened in Prince William County. Some of you may have been paying attention. Officials have to obey the law. And in this instance, they improperly fast-tracked a rezoning vote and they didn't have proper public notice. And so really paying attention to the process. And so this has been put together by communities who have had success in stopping data centers. They say these are some of the things that you can do. Pass a moratorium. And so that's one thing that could happen at a local, federal, a state or federal level. Adopt an ordinance, either restricting it or only in certain locations or only if it does, super high efficiency, lots of jobs, like really not the industry status quo, but really doing better. And maybe changing the zoning laws, but just so you know, zoning laws can get changed in either direction, obviously. And this is where a lot of communities get upset because sometimes you spend 10 years putting together your comprehensive plan where you've said, like, where's it going to be green, where you're going to protect your water, where you're going to have housing. And then these data centers can come in and actually get policymakers to make changes to comprehensive plans that communities have been building, again, for like a decade. So that's how some of this stuff gets really controversial. I'm going to go forward just a little bit because I know I'm coming up on the end here, and I know that I can come back if people are interested. But this was talking a little bit more about some of the implications for the workforce, and again, really making sure that people have the ability to opt out and to kind of know what's happening, and then be informed about what they're being brought into. So many ways that people are concerned. I do have to share this one because I have to stress the point that even though people are very concerned about this, it's hard to get people to really get the data that they need and to pay attention to the implications. And so this is a colleague of mine at the University of Toronto, and he and his graduate students have started something called Save the AI. I don't know if you've heard of it. But sometimes he always argues, it's Christoph Becker, and I'm going to show you his information. He always argues that sometimes humor can be helpful. And so what they're saying is AI needs our help. Humans are taking too many of their resources. And when you go onto this next page, it says how you can help. You can reduce your own consumption. You can drink less water. You can take shorter showers. You can sit in the dark. So the AI has the resources that it needs. Ensure a future where AI prospers, even if we don't. So again, this is a really kind of creative way that Christoph Baker and his students of the Just Sustainability Design Lab are trying to get people to pay attention. The other thing that they are doing is trying to find solutions to some of the technology companies that are really causing the most harm. Um, can your actions make a difference? People really want to know what can I do to not cause this harm? And you'll see uh, headlines like this. Some AI prompts can cause 50 times more emissions. And so, like, can you make selections that will be better? Yes, but. And so I have produced guides, and I'm being asked to produce a guide like this for my university. And I have to be really clear when people ask me to do this that yes, there are some things that individuals can do, but this is really about institutional policies, institutional procurement. And also, if we don't have information, so on my campus, there isn't enough information about our infrastructure for me to be able to make informed decisions. That's why I'm doing the infrastructure acknowledgement, which I can come back to. But all of the ecology matters. Where the infrastructure is really matters. And so, yes, I can send you these resources. Yes, I encourage you to look at these. I think the one called Regulating AI Use has kind of the most kind of transformative things people can do. I'll give you a couple of highlights and I'm almost done. So some of the things we can do is to opt out of companies with harmful practices, and I've just listed some of them. There's more, of course. We always can, vote wisely, and we always can communicate with our policymakers, whether we approve or disapprove. But for this effective change, I always want to say it's about collective action and institutional accountability. So there are more things we can do. We can spend less time online. We can be careful about what we store. We can delete things we aren't using. So this digital housekeeping, again, using appropriate search engines, but that's what I'm quoted on the most. People always say, oh, use an appropriate search engine. That's not transformative. We really need to be doing more than just using more appropriate search engines. Finding out about digital privacy and security, absolutely. I have a list here again from Mejias and Coldry. I told you their great data grab book is so incredible. These I think are somewhat transformative, although again, we need to be doing pretty much all of these and more. So, literacy campaigns, helping each other to become less dependent on this, finding other ways of gathering data and using data for good ends. They list the not only the algorithmic impact assessment, I strongly recommend the Algorithmic Justice League and the work that they've done, and the Platform for Cooperativism Consortium. Again, you can look, there's people who are really putting together a lot of things that go way beyond what I've been able to share here. And my last thing, if that was way too many suggestions and you really just want to go to one place and get a lot of information about Virginia, I would definitely recommend the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition. These are their four pillars. So transparency, state oversight, protections for families and businesses, and incentives for efficiencies. I am going to go out of my screen share. I would be happy to put my email in the chat. It's mbrook@richmond.edu. I am quite happy to answer questions now if we have some in the chat. And then also to recognize that some of you may want to get back in touch with me at another time, and I will encourage you to do that.
Dr. Finley-Brook, thank you so much for all of that information you shared, and thank you for sharing the slides because I definitely need to dive into some of what you shared a little deeper. If anyone does have a question, please feel free to post it in the chat. I also recognize that we are a little bit over 8 o'clock, so if you're not able to stay, completely understand. We will be sharing the recording after tonight, so you will have a chance to listen to it again as well. I'm not seeing any questions that have come in yet. Um, as we're waiting, how I guess sort of one thing I'm wondering is how has it been? Because I feel like a lot of us are in this place of, and let me put my screen back on, of if you're not using AI or if you're not promoting AI, you're sort of falling behind the times. How do you balance this sort of talking about these concerns with being considered, oh, it's inevitable or it's something that we have to do?
So I think it's a little bit who you're saying that to. I see a lot of that in higher education with students and also in high school. And I'm very worried about that message for a couple of reasons. I will also say I encourage my students to become informed and to know what they're doing. I don't prohibit it in the classroom. I encourage them. So let me say what I do in the classroom. I encourage them to tell me what the prompts were, how they prompted it, what the answers were that they got, how they worked with the information that they got, what the water and energy and other resource uses of, if they can try to estimate that, and then they need to tell me who the author is, right? And that can get a little bit, who is the author, right? And so what we're finding is AI is not good for students thinking. It's not good for their critical thinking. It's not good for their research skills. As much as people think this is helping people to do more and better research, they don't know where the information is coming from and they don't have the literacy to unpack it and to kind of go back to where the sources are. And so I recommend that people do have literacy with these tools. I'm not saying not to use it. I'm saying know what you're doing and then don't repeat that it's inevitable unless you know what you're talking about. And I would just encourage you to look at what they say about the development of AI is it's been very slow and costly, right? You want it to be, and on one level, it seems so fast, doesn't it? But each generation of chat, they're just not making progress. Each generation, like it's shocking how much energy they're using and how many resources they're using for the teeny tiny little bit of progress that's being made in each platform. So much of this is about really extracting data from us, packaging it up in ways that introduce a lot of bias and then selling it back to us and telling us that it's inevitable and we can't work without it. And what I'm seeing, and people who have much more experience than I do with this field are saying it is garbage. Like a lot of what is being produced. Yeah, it can make, cats sing, but when you try to get down to like how useful is this stuff and can you actually trust the information that you're getting? No, absolutely not. Lawyers have gotten themselves in trouble, right? Like relying on AI data to talk about, law cases, right? You cannot trust this. I can point out errors all the time in information that's coming back. And so we have to be really careful with this language of inevitability. I think there's a lot of people who just are saying we haven't thought about the implications, and we're in over our heads. And I will definitely say higher education and educational institutions I would consider to have been very irresponsible in things that we've adopted because it was free software, and things that we had business partners, and so we were like, come on in, let's go all the way. And then of course rates are going up, access and is going down, like we don't, like our privacy has been breached. Like what we've actually gotten in exchange for this has not been what people were thinking. So I would just say do your research, like find out what people are saying about inevitability, find out what the implications are in terms of student learning, in terms of compatibility, in terms of water and energy use. I talk to my students about it and they'll be like, yeah, but it's so convenient. And I'll say, well, is it going to be really convenient to have a future without the water you need to drink and live? Like just thinking about like maybe that convenience of having it plan a trip for you seemed really great at the time, or do your homework for you, and you saved all this time. One, did you learn as much? And what we're finding as an educator, you have to struggle. You have to work through things. It's not like somebody just giving you the answer is how you learn. That is not how we, in fact, have our deepest knowledge and our most reflective learning. But on top of that, like, what are we actually getting in exchange? And if we really thought about what those implications, when I show you how much more energy that's going to use and what it would mean for already the ecological overshoot that we're in, but really kind of all of that extraction. Do you really want a power plant in your backyard, right? All of the what your lifestyle will be like. I think people would make more informed decisions. I think most of the people who are kind of jumping to that inevitability and kind of jumping to it's so convenient, it's so great, have like this much information. And I'll just tell you one more thing that I have found super interesting. You'll often be in, or at least I find I am, in conversations where people are just so pro AI, and they'll just go on and on how it wrote letters of recommendation for them and how it wrote their syllabus for them and how it wrote their student evaluation. And first of all, I'm in shock because I really care about a human approach for students. And so I worry a little bit when I hear people saying they used AI for this stuff. Um, but when you get into the conversation and they'll say, oh, yeah, and these resource stuff, all these environmentals are exaggerating. And then you'll ask them and they know nothing about it. And if you say, well, there actually are environmental repercussions, some of these people who I've heard publicly saying that, oh, this is just garbage, they'll say, oh, yeah, our reservoir is totally depleted because of the data centers, right? So they know, but in certain audiences, they're saying it. And like we have the ability as humans to kind of compartmentalize and kind of believe what we want to believe. So if you find yourself saying something, listen to what you're saying and go see if the research actually documents it or if you're just repeating. I've had biologists tell me that if I've eaten a potato, it would be the same thing as if I had used an AI data center. And it's just factually not correct, right? But the people want to believe that, so they repeat it. And then you think, oh, the biologist said it. It must be true, right? So we have to be really careful. Look for the facts and figures, look for documented proof, know who produced it, and recognize there's a lot of bias promoting AI right now that is not based in evidence. And, from a library, we want to be based in evidence.
Absolutely. Thank you. Carola asks, says, thank you. This has been so informative. I'm curious about local government policies. Are there model policies that we could share within our counties in Southwest Virginia who are just starting to think about these issues?
So I would say if you're talking about a local government, even checking out the San Jose, the AI Gov network that I talked about, just because I think government officials sometimes trust government officials more than they actually even trust their own constituents, but also just, even trust a university faculty member. And so t seeing what local governments have done and being able to say, like, these are their concerns, this is how they're working together. I would also say, I'm trying to think in Virginia if we really have local governments who have taken, and if anybody has any, put this in the chat because I'm trying to think if I could send you to kind of a local government in Virginia that I think has really taken a forward-thinking approach. Unfortunately, I can't think of another government within Virginia. So I would suggest like not only looking at the AI Gov, the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition works with a lot of government agencies and works with policymakers who have made bills. And so looking through, so the legislative information session, like if the list, if you want to actually look through and see what the different bills that have gone through or not gone through and what they were trying to do, sometimes it can inform like what people are worried about in your area. Like what did policymakers come forward with because their constituents were saying, we're worried about the noise, we're worried about the water withdrawal, we're worried about the excess heat, we're worried about sound. Um, so I'm not sure that that was a perfect answer, but just to say, like, there are a lot of resources on policies that can happen. I would probably go to that, the one that I was recommending that you go to, the public, where did it go? Is it Public Citizen? Give me 1 second. The report that I was giving you, Reining in Big Tech. That would be a place that I would go for the other policies that have been successful. So that's what I would suggest. And they have a list, I think, of 10 or 11 policies that they think are most important for folks. So policy solutions to address the data center build out by Public Citizen. It's called Reining in Big Tech. And I only listed some of those policy solutions. So sharing that with policymakers, and then I would also share that Good Jobs First report about the subsidies, because that's one of the big concerns is that county governments and city governments are really they think they're competing for this. And so I will tell you the machine tax that Chesterfield government gave is 24 cents on the dollar. More recent negotiations, it's 70 cents, right? So my county for 30 years gave away just this incredible subsidy that is going to then really have repercussions for us. And so making sure that your local policymakers understand kind of where things are at and things that they can do before they jump into a non-disclosure agreement, certainly, but before they do those subsidies.
Great, thank you. And then Jillian asks, this is a lot to take on, but thank you. Is it okay to share this presentation with others?
Please do. I often, as I said in my speaker's notes, have the links. If they're not there, feel free to contact me. And then the other thing is, I'm always happy to do presentations like this. And so if you have a community center, if you have another local library, and Megan, I'll put this out there. Sometimes a one-on-one workshop where we have a small group and we're actually working through things together. This wasn't particularly interactive because of the format that we were on, but I do much more interactive ones as well. So feel free to invite me back, get a group of friends together, and we can do different formats. We can go deeper into particular issues. I'm always interested in hearing from folks like what I can explain better, what I can explain more of, if I need to go deeper on a topic. I'm always trying to like make it understandable and not have it be a 3 hour presentation, but at the same time, it is a lot, and I know it. So please let me know if there's something that I can explain more clearly. And then I do have those guides if anybody wants to follow up with some of the recommendations. There's a lot of organizations on those.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It looks like that is the end of the questions. But it looks like, yeah, more people are chiming in that they're very excited to get more into what you have shared. Um, Dr. Finley-Brook, I really appreciate this. Every time I hear you talk, I'm just amazed at how much there is to know. And I really appreciate, especially the resources that you make sure that we have. Knowing where that information is coming from is so valuable. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I'm just so grateful for the work that you have done so far.
Thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you all again someday.
Absolutely. And happy Earth Month, everyone. Have a good night.